So welcome to the Genius Lab, where we help you realize your greatness. Today, we are blessed to have the great and amazing, wonderful Dr. Janelle Royster, who is responsible for saving, no exaggeration, thousands of lives from people who have post-traumatic stress, who have had horrific, catastrophic trauma in their lives. And many who call her, and I went to a conference with her a few weeks ago, and I was down at her house, and like 3 o'clock in the morning, she's talking on the phone, and I'm like, "What the hell were you doing talking on the phone at 3 in the morning?" And she said, "Talking to a guy off a ledge. You know, someone calls her up with a gun to their head, and she does her best to make sure that doesn't happen." And we appreciate very much the work that you do. I have personally benefited from it, working through some trauma from my past. And here at the Genius Lab, our theme is help you realize your greatness. And what is helping people realize their greatness? You do it all the time, because if a person doesn't come into their really understanding their greatness, they don't have a will to live. And a lot of people that you deal with have lost that. So what is it for you? And tell us about what you do.
Well, thank you for allowing me to be here today. And you've done a lot for me too. So I like how you word things, and I've had many Calvary Show readings, probably more than most. But I think it's exciting, what those say to you and how you can, put those in your own life. But helping about, I think I'm almost to 4,000 now in the past couple of
Wow.
years, and I'm pretty honored to be part of that and having all these lovely resources that reach out and say, hey, my boyfriend, my brother, my sister, my mother, my uncle, whoever needs help. And it's pretty humbling to have all this training and realize that you can create and develop some modalities to really get them to where they need to be. I got I got a testimonial the other day, and it just said Dr. Royster's legit because he was Army Air Force. He served in the military, he served in the Air Force like I did. So we established that rapport then. And then for him to talk about, not having dreams, not waking up with night sweats, not having all these debilitating post-traumatic symptoms, it's an honor to be a part of that journey and get them where they want to go. He's also a retired LEO, so he's like been not only serving his country, but serving his community. And I love the opportunity to help somebody else.
And just, for us non-military people, what's an LEO?
Oh, law enforcement officer.
She always has these
I do.
acronyms. Yeah, we got the CBD and the HRQ, and then we went down to the, and it's like listening to Chinese. I have no idea
Yeah,
what she's saying.
QRF. Quick
When I'm
reaction
with her and
force.
her military buddies, it's like I'm not even in the conversation. I feel like I'm back in Burkina Faso. So, um, you know, success often follows, adversity and hard work, right? And what are the things that you've gone through to get you where you are?
Well, in 2012, I was diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and I didn't really understand what that was or what that meant. And breaking it down, essentially, some professor at Harvard decided to coin it because it is more complicated than post-traumatic stress. So post-traumatic stress could be one event or several events, but complex means that it happened over a long period of time. We're talking 10 years. We're talking
Hmm.
child abuse, domestic violence, and, all of those things that I've suffered with.
Mm-hmm.
So finding a solution, I didn't anticipate becoming a therapist to focus on trauma. I was always a little avoidant of it at
Uh-huh.
first, but when
Uh-huh.
I started my journey as a counselor, I started working with human traffic survivors. And I'm like, well, you just threw me in the pit, didn't
Oh,
you?
wow, no kidding. Not talk about starting with a high bar.
Right. And then I worked in a acute care psychiatric facility, and that's basically a revolving door. So the patients, they can't get their meds for whatever reason, and they have to come back to the hospital to kind of get things right in their mind because the challenge is with some of the personality disorders and schizophrenia and some of these more severe events, they need medication to regulate those neural pathways in the brain. And we can talk about that a little later when I talk about the brain stuff where I'm going now. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's good
Wow.
stuff.
So you've really, you've overcome a lot of adversity in your own life that has
Yeah.
kind of been the impetus for you to create this protocol that's so critical and so wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit about it and how it differs from traditional um, therapy modalities? Because I've heard, I've worked with veterans along the way with my sound healing. And a lot of them have talked about EMDR and a thing where they make you relive the thing over and over again, exposure therapy. And
Right.
what can you give us a little bit of background about how yours is different and what are the success rates of what we would call traditionally accepted things by the VA or by the psychiatric community in
Right.
general? And then how does it differ from what you do and how do the results differ?
So when I first started on my counseling journey, I realized that I'm now trained in 30 different therapeutic modalities. I've
Holy smokes.
kind of found things along the way. And I want to get trained in everything because there's 7 billion people on the planet and they all need something different. Everybody beats to their own drum. So I really want to focus on the events that occur, but not necessarily sitting in those feelings. Because for me, it was very traumatic to see a therapist who wanted me to sit in my feelings of hurt and pain and guilt and shame and all of those, emotions that I reacted negatively to. So for me, I wanted to find and create a way that an individual could overcome some of those post traumatic stress symptoms like flashbacks, nightmares, intrusive thoughts, and those things that they're suffering with every day that they can't seem to get out of their mind without them having to relive or share that experience. Because every time you share it verbally, you're reliving it. And
Okay.
that just brings up all those feelings again, which is very challenging to get out of. And as I learned the clinical path that I was taking, everybody wanted you to kind of invest in that experience and take you back to that memory
Hmm.
with the feelings, thoughts, and emotions attached to it. Then you have the behaviors. And it was excruciating for me. And because I went through Gestalt, which is where you sit in your feelings and you kind of move forward, and it's a longer, slower process. For me, it wasn't working.
Okay.
So I found a couple of trainings. I'm trained in EMDR, ART, and RTM, which are all neuro-linguistic programming protocols.
Okay.
And they do use a lot of abbreviations, and I'm sorry, but at the VA, what happens is they need it to be evidence-based. Well, evidence-based came out in 1992. So it's recently new in and of itself anyway.
Okay.
Well, that's probably 30 years ago now. But 1992 doesn't sound that far away. I
I
don't
know,
know.
you're right. You're right. It's like, oh, that was just like no big deal. And then I'm like, wow, wait a
So when
minute.
I was working with a Marine who was on a post in Fallujah, what happened to him was pretty traumatic. And I don't want to share because I don't want to affect your listeners, but he really struggled with having to tell me his story. And he had been through the VA. He had done what's called prolonged exposure, which is you're exposed to the same event over and over and over again for about 12 weeks and you become desensitized to that event. Well, the
That kind
challenge
of
with
sounds like hitting your hand with a hammer enough times to where you don't feel it anymore.
right,
Is that kind of,
exactly.
yeah, okay. Just checking.
So with him, he went through prolonged exposure, but of course he quit. He couldn't function, didn't have a job. His uncle called me begging me to work with him because he was just struggling. He couldn't see the light of day. And when he first started to tell me his story, I'm like, stop. I couldn't. It was traumatizing to me.
Oh, wow.
It was pretty horrific story, probably one of the worst I heard. And I work with human traffic survivors.
Oh,
So
geez.
hearing that, it was just overwhelming. So I stopped him and then I kind of regrouped, and he was really the catalyst that brought in the no content. So it's just been evolving, and every
Now,
person I
no
work with,
content. Can you, what do you mean no content?
it means they don't have to share the details of the story.
So you can work on someone and make a dramatic difference in their condition without even knowing anything about what happened.
Correct. You
Wow.
can alleviate the symptoms because the brain knows what happened. It doesn't have to be my business. And that's what I think
Yeah.
clinicians need to understand is you don't necessarily have to be invested in the person you're working with. You don't have to invest in their story. You have to invest in them, but not their story
Well,
in order
that's
for
what's
them
so
to feel
cool. That probably is a really positive thing for the therapist as well, who doesn't have to. I mean, you hear all this horrific stuff over and over and over again. That's got to mess with the therapist as well, huh?
well, we need therapists too.
Yeah.
When we're working with people and in the struggle with trauma that I've dealt with and the therapists that come to see me for therapy, I've realized that they're coming to me to kind of unload some of those stories and the way that they bother them. I had a therapist the other day, I'm not going to mention any names because they're clients, but they had a client who had an abortion at 24 weeks, and it was really traumatizing to her, the clinician,
Yes.
because
Okay.
she had her own beliefs and she felt her own way about things. And we're really trained to not take on their stories, but sometimes they seep in.
Yes.
So
Yes.
this is another way of alleviating maybe the clinician's way of having to deal with some of the feelings that they feel, because that's a moral injury,
Wow.
because it's specifically not only against the client's beliefs, but in the situation the client was in, there was nothing she could do.
Uh-huh.
And according to the therapist, there was the challenge was is there weren't any symptoms, and by the time she found out, it was really late.
Yeah.
So the client's struggling, now the therapist is struggling because of their ideals and their
Yes.
beliefs.
Oh man.
So it's hard.
Yeah. So you just bypass that whole thing.
Hmm.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
there's no details. It's just how you feel about those events. Because the way the brain is set up, the neural pathways, the highways of the brain, when we take the information, when we receive it, and it goes all the way back to where it's stored, it picks up things along the way. And that's what causes them to feel, I relate it to, the man who comes home after a hard day at work. He doesn't flip the table because the meatloaf's cold. He flips it because he's angry.
Got it. Wow. So that's pretty exciting. So when someone deals with this particular protocol, which seems like it would be like super popular because like who wants to relive their shit, right?
Right.
I
Well, the
certainly.
VAs, unfortunately, with research kind of muddles and waters things down a lot. I'm doing 3 studies right now, just to prove the efficacy of the trauma recovery intervention protocol, which I call TRIP. And I'm doing it with 30 veterans, 30 police, 30 firefighters right now.
Wow.
So it's a double blind study, which basically means that the individual will go see the clinical psychologist. They get the assessment. I do 2 sessions of TRIP, and then they go back to the psychologist uh, after the 2 sessions are completed, and then that's it. And then we move on to the next veteran or the next police officer or the next fireman.
Wow. 2 sessions.
Yeah, good stuff.
Wow. I know people that are like, I've been doing, EMDR is one that it seems to pop up a lot. It seems to be a
Mhm.
popular thing. I've been doing it for 9 months, twice a week, and it's really, it's helping me. But I got, they keep doing it. I had another vet who was a Gulf War vet, and the problem there was his therapist worked on a 50-minute hour. And when he started getting him riled up, if you're all of a sudden hit your 50 minutes, well, time's up, but they
Mhm.
haven't had a time to decompress.
Right.
He would come into a session, he'd call me like on the rails because I use sound. So it's completely nonverbal.
Mhm.
And but if somebody could come to you and I mean, this guy had been doing it for years
Right.
and was not getting I mean, sometimes some sessions were better than others, but wow, 2 sessions. That's really
Right.
amazing.
Yeah, that's exciting. I love that. I love
So,
hearing it.
so So is this going to be in every VA hospital in the world, or what's the deal?
Eventually, yeah.
Okay.
See, the challenge with evidence-based is it has to be the studies have to be published, and it typically takes between 5 and 10 years.
Wow.
I just become a VA referral source right now, so
Well, hey,
that
that
seems to
works.
be working.
I guess
Yeah, a
the
lot of
important
people
thing,
are.
yeah, and now do you train people in this?
I do. So yes. I'm working on that now, along with everything else I have going on. I'm writing a book, I'm finishing a dissertation. I have
Wow.
yeah, it's very busy, but yeah, I do. I can set up trainings and coordinate things, and yeah, it's a script. So what's really cool about it is that it's no content. It can do more than one traumatic event, because I don't think anybody has just one trauma.
Yeah.
One may stick out, one may bother you, but there's
Uh-huh.
usually stuff underneath it that is built up, because from the ages of 4 to 7, we record all of our negative emotions. And from the age of 7 on, we replay them.
Oh, interesting.
So you want to go before that and get those little nuggets out of there.
Oh, got it. Now, do you have to be a therapist to learn this, or like if some of our listeners are interested in helping people that struggle with post-traumatic stress or struggle themselves?
Right.
I'm obviously in the description, I'm going to post how people can get a hold of you. But can people get trained? Can non-licensed people get trained and actually be helpful using this protocol?
Absolutely. Well, it's got some NLP in it. It's got some cognitive behavioral, and it's got some hypnosis at the end, just kind of seal things off. Because what I've found in receiving the training for EMDR is, like you said, at 50 minutes, they're like, well, that's all the time we have. And there's no way to seal it in. There's no way to decompress. And then if that person hasn't really worked through that traumatic event, they could like get into an accident on the way home. I've heard about that. But
Hmm.
I've also heard that people love EMDR. Like one size does not fit all. Obviously, this between your music and your sound healing and your drumming. I mean, there's
Yeah.
so many ways. There's yoga. There's even the cowrie shells kind of leave a sense of satisfaction or
Hmm.
completeness. At least
Hmm.
it does for me. So when you do a reading for me, it makes me feel really good. It gives me hope and purpose, because I can see kind of where I've been and where I'm going. So it's pretty exciting. I
Yeah.
love what you do.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, if you were going to talk to a listener and give them some advice for how they could find, they're struggling. Like I don't have a sense of purpose. You talk about realizing your greatness. I can't realize that I could possibly even have greatness. What would you have? What you've been through a lot, and you have come out way on top. What would you recommend to our listeners to help them find their greatness?
Well, other than calling you,
Well, I appreciate that.
I think hope and purpose is huge. I think we lose that, especially the military veterans that come back.
Hmm.
I listened to a podcast the other day, and it was pretty amazing. He said, when you're over there, all you want to do is come home. And when you're home, all you want to do is go over there.
You got it. Wow.
So there's like this cycle. And I've had a bunch of conversations with he's the senior enlisted airman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he's a pretty good friend of mine. And he said, if you don't have hope and purpose, you don't feel like you belong anywhere. And for me, I thought that was pretty powerful, to make
Mhm.
sure that they can kind of reach out and say, okay, I'm struggling with this. I'm struggling with that. So, okay, well, what do you want? What is it at the end of the day that you need? And kind of get them to understand that there is something. If you take all these symptoms out, the emotional flashbacks, the nightmares, all that,
Yes.
and you're looking at the person, it's like, what is your hope and purpose? And most people will give you those goals. Most people have an idea of what they're looking for.
Uh-huh. So what's the best, just because people might not want to look at the description, let's give it to them right now. How do people get in touch with you if they need help?
Okay, so I have a private practice. It's called Semper Motus, SEMPERMOTIS. It always means always motivated or always on the move.
Nice.
Um, And it basically is for the person that wants to keep going, even if you're stuck and you can't see, the sun. Basically, there's just clouds everywhere and you're really struggling and you can't see what's beyond. It's almost like you instill that hope and purpose by having these conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to realize that, like you said, the 3 a.m. guy, he was, he called me and he's like, I'm back in Afghanistan. And I'm like, okay, what's there? And he's like, what? Everybody's trying to talk me out of it. And I'm like, no, we're going to talk you through this.
Wow. I love it.
So I think that was the big thing, is people can't see beyond the end of their nose sometimes. Sometimes they really have tunnel vision, and it's not their fault. It just is.
Yeah. So Semper Modus, you have a website, right?
I do.
Is that
Semper Modus LLC?
sempermodusllc.com or com? Beautiful. sempermodusllc.com, and they can contact you through that website to
Yes.
get in touch with you.
Yep, there's an
Beautiful.
email little section, and the website's being kind of revamped a little bit because
Beautiful.
everything is ever evolving.
Absolutely, no question about that. And then, of course, in the description of this podcast, we're going to put Dr. J's information. So if you are struggling with trauma from the past, in a traumatic situation, and you need help, we're going to make sure that's easy to find.
Yeah, what's really cool is my private practice is full of veterans and first responders that because what happens is when I talk to somebody and they start talking and they're a little stoic and they're a little reserved, and I say, oh, I serve too, and then they kind of perk up.
Okay.
Because we know each other. Whether we know each other or not, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. There's like a camaraderie there, but you work with us normal civilians too, right?
Yeah, I work with civilians, and what I've learned is I had to start writing a book, and it's called Change Your Language, Change Your Life. And the first page has one sentence on it. It says, why am I so mean to me?
Wow.
Because I work with so many people that have confidence issues. And it's like, okay, your mother told you you were too short when you were 4 years old. What does that have to do with when you were 50?
Yeah.
So
we carry that stuff through though, right?
Correct.
Wow.
We absolutely do, because it was a traumatizing event for them.
Yeah.
Because I mean, if you think about it, an 8-month-old or 9-month-old has no idea what color they are. They have no idea what sex they are. They've never been told anything bad, right? They're just existing. And somewhere along the way, we start to take value in what the words other people use toward us. And that's my question. It's like, why do you value that person? If this person is hurtful and making you feel like you're less than, why would you value their words? They're struggling too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what the book's about. It's going to be called Change Your Language, Change Your Life.
I love it. Well, let us know when it gets published, and we'll be sure and put it out to everybody. In the meantime, if you want to get a hold of Dr. J, the information is in the description of the podcast, or you can go to sempermodusllc.com. And Dr. J, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It's been an absolute pleasure as always. And we'll look forward to you healing more and more people of this terrible malady. And good luck on your study and your book and everything you've got going on. And we will definitely have you back.
Thank you. I'm excited.
So awesome. That's it for today. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. If you have any questions, contact me, Toby at tobychristensen.com.